So in the previous video, I talked about specifically an example in which we would talk about 30 degrees as our reference angle. Well, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about this thing in general. So if I were to say draw something in a certain angle in standard form, or standard position, I mean, what we're doing is we're always going from the 0 degrees, which coincidentally, just because that's the way the circle turns, is also 360 degrees. We're also always starting from the 0. So we have quadrant 1, we have quadrant 2, we have quadrant 3, and we have quadrant 4. The reference angle is always going to be from the x-axis to the line. So everywhere we go in this kind of diagram, our reference angle is always going to be between the x-axis, okay, and the degrees. Now, some people get fooled and go to the nearest axes. So that would mean that some people would think that we would find the distance between this and the terminal arm, that's what this is called, and the y-axis, but that's not true. It's always going to be between the terminal arm and the x-axis. So you can find where the reference angle is all throughout. So in quadrant 1, it is just what it is. But in quadrant 2, we have this line right here, from here to here. And in order to find out what your angle is in quadrant 2, you're going to say the angle is just simply 180 degrees, which is this line right here, 180, minus the reference angle chunk. Now, if you're asked for what the reference angle is, you can say the reference angle is just going to be the 180. You take the whole 180 and then you subtract this angle here, which will be between 90 and 180. So those are kind of the two helpful formulas that I would say were you should get to know. In the third quadrant, it's just a little bit more than 180. So if you want to find out what your angle is, you're going to, if you want to find out what your angle is, somewhere between 180 and 270, it's going to be 180 plus the reference angle, right? Because it's 180, this line, plus the difference from the x-axis to the terminal arm, which is where your reference angle is. Or if you're being asked what's your reference angle, you can simply say, okay, I'm going to take this whole angle starting from 0, this whole angle, and then I'm going to subtract 180 from it, because then I will get the distance between the x-axis and the terminal arm. So I take the angle that I've been given and I minus 180. And last but not least, the fourth quadrant. So in the fourth quadrant, we're dealing with 360. So it's 360 minus this reference angle if you want to figure out what the angle is between 270 and 360. So it would be 360 minus the reference angle. Or if you wanted to figure out what the reference angle was for an angle in the fourth quadrant, you would say, okay, I'm going to take 360 and I'm going to subtract this chunk out of it to figure out what the distance is between the x-axis and the terminal arm. So 360 minus theta. One more really important kind of thing to remember is where sine is positive and where cosine is positive. So in this one, cosine, sine, and tan, they're all positive. In this quadrant, our sine is positive, but our cosine and tangent are negative. right? Because sine is associated with the y-coordinate. So in the top half, the y-coordinates are all positive. In this one, when we're looking at our C, S, T, we're saying that tan is positive, but both sine and cosine are negative, because cosine is associated with your x. So your x values will be negative, your x values will be negative, and your y values will be negative as well. And last but not least, when we're looking at our cosine, sine, and tan, here the cosine, because it's associated with the x-axis, is positive. The sine is negative and the tan is negative. When I'm going to highlight this right here, C, and this is, I'm going to call this A, okay, because all of them are positive. And then I'm going to circle this one right here, the S and the T. This is the cast rule. That's how we that's a very easy kind of way to remember. Though it's better to remember that any point here is going to be r cos theta, r sine theta. We can remember using the cast rule starting in the fourth quadrant. So here cosine is positive, all are positive, sine is positive, and tan is positive. So this is kind of the summary and the basis from which we can answer a whole bunch of different kind of questions, which will come up in the next videos.